Hi, I'm Lance Lambert. Thanks for tuning into the Vintage Vehicle Show. We are in Santa Monica, California at Kaucher Kustoms. You know, every car that you see out there, these gorgeous cars at car shows and on displays and on television shows and just everywhere, they all started with something up here, an idea in somebody's head. And that idea has to be put on paper and the car has to be built based on that. Well, Keith Kaucher is an automotive designer of great renown. He's very talented, and we're going to get a chance to meet him, talk to him about how this all happens, how it goes from in here to the finished product. So let's go inside and meet Keith. Keith Kaucher, thank you very much for inviting us into your studio here. I'm looking around here and I'm seeing all this beautiful artwork that you have done. Take us back to the beginning. You're in kindergarten and you're sketching on the border of...
Essentially, I was about 5 years old. My dad and I were sitting around one night and he was drawing airplanes for me. My dad was a former aircraft engineer. And so he was sitting there penciling these drawings of airplanes because he loves airplanes. And I said, well, can you draw a car? And he said, yeah, sure, I can draw a car. And I said, what car do you want me to draw? I said, well, draw our Buick. So he drew a picture of this 61 Buick Special that he had. And he just did a little side profile of it, but it was really cool. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So I was like, man, I sat there and tried to imitate drawing that car. And I was probably about 5 years old. I think about the time I was 13, I started taking it a little serious and started realizing that maybe I'd like to do this for a living. And my dad mentioned a man named Raymond Loewy to me. And I said, well, who is he? And he said, well, he was a famous industrial designer. I said, well, what's that? And he says, well, that's guys that design cars and washing machines and buses and trains and all kinds of things like that. And I said, wow. And he goes, and Raymond Loewy was 10 years ahead of his time. And I said, that's the guy I want to be. I want to be Raymond Loewy. I want to design cars and be 10 years ahead of my time and all that stuff. I don't know if I've achieved any of that yet, but I'm working at it.
You picked a good one to emulate. So
yeah, absolutely.
So it went from drawings, and then you got into model cars.
Mm-hmm. Model cars happened about 9 years old for me. My dad said, when you turn 9, you can start building cars, because he didn't want me messing with the glue and stuff until I was old enough. So I bought my first car at 9 years old. I went down to Evetts Hobby Shop and I bought this 40 Ford Coupe, and it was the first model I built. And I built it in an hour. I didn't paint it or anything. I just built it in white and put some wheels and a big blower and all that stuff on it. And I was on my way. And by the time I was probably, 12, I had a drawer that pulled out from underneath my underneath my closet in my bedroom. And I had it all segmented with old model boxes, and I had bumpers here and windshields and bodies and hoods. And my buddies who also built models in the neighborhood would come over because they knew I had just a surplus of stuff, and they'd buy parts from me, and I'd go through and they'd go, I need a bumper for a 57 Ford. And I'd go through, I have one here. And they'd go, how do you know it's 57 Ford? And I said, I just know. And it's kind of funny because that's followed me through life. When I design a car, I can sit there and go, oh yeah, that bumper would look great, or those headlights would look great. And people are like, how do you know that? I just know. I know what fits. I know what roughly about the size and dimensions. I get good spatial, engineering in my brain, I guess.
So that drawer was the world's smallest custom shop there.
Or a junkyard, but however you want to look at it, I guess. I didn't do a lot of customs as a kid. I did mostly muscle cars. That was mostly my favorite. And it was in my later years that I started doing the customs that you see back there.
Some of the best memories in my life were being 12, 13, 14, 15, sitting with something like this, just listening to rock and roll music and building model cars, and I was at peace with the world. There was nothing going wrong at that moment. So you get to continue experiencing that.
Yeah, I do, and I basically feel blessed every day that I get to do that. I haven't been able to do it lately, but when I do, it's just really an experience. I absolutely love doing that. I sometimes will kick on the radio and sit back here, and I can basically waste an entire weekend back here and not see the light of day. And I did that a lot as a kid too. I was like the palest kid in the summer because I was inside, building models all day long.
Something I've seen that you've seen too in the hobby is a lot of guys like me that built these cars, and then at the stroke of 16, man, those cars were in the dresser drawer, and I was out dealing with the real deal. and then we get to be 50, 55, and we kind of, next thing you know, there's a bunch of these old guys sitting around building model cars again.
Yeah, it's funny because I think you kind of go through that transition where, you know, it's a lot easier to do this. You don't have to pick up a hammer or a wrench. You know, you can sit there at your leisure. You can put on the TV or the radio or whatever you want to do, and have a nice cold beer and just sit there and to your heart's content. It is just about as rewarding, I got to say. The only thing is you don't get to drive them. You can just sit there and look at them.
So you get an idea in your head, and then you need to put it on paper. What's the process? How's it go from head to paper?
Well, essentially, this is for a guy named Gray Fredericks, and this is his coronet. He was telling me he loves his car, loves everything about it, but he wanted to do something a little different with it. He loved the stance of it and whatnot. So as we were talking, and this was at the SEMA show, I started saying to myself, or I actually remembered that I had years ago been toying with the idea of what would a coronet look like with the Charger front end and taillights, because they're essentially the same car. The main difference is that this has a low wheel arch and the Charger has a high wheel arch, and Charger also has a fastback roof. So the idea was already floating in my head, and so when I got some time here, he had emailed me pictures of his car, which is what we were going in. They're not really great pictures because he got it cut off. I mean, that's exactly how he photographed it. So I went on the internet and I grabbed a couple of pictures in views that I kind of like. Now, some people call me a cheater for doing this, but this was actually the way I was trained. I actually will trace the car out first. Now I can sit there and hand draw this thing. I can sit there and look at this and do that, but I'm like, why would I want to do that? I mean, it takes longer and it's never as accurate, and I'm really big on accuracy. So I'll just basically get the concept down on paper, and as I'm drawing, I'm literally changing stuff. So I'm basically tracing the basic lines, but the whole car starts changing right over the top of the paper, just as you can see it here. So here's my car, and here's, you can see, yeah. I relocated the wheels, I took the roof off, I put the Charger front end on it, I did the bumper, I put the scoops. So it starts here in this process.
You have a pile, that's not a kind word here, you have a assortment of your past works and current projects. Can we take a look at some of these?
Sure. As I mentioned before, this is kind of the end product. I actually have some iterations of this somewhere. I'm not quite sure where they are in the office right now, but this particular concept was, what would happen if you combined a Ferrari and a hot rod together? What would you get? And so I found the earliest Ferrari pictures I could find, and found out that actually the very first Ferraris were actually Alfa Romeo. So I based it off this Alfa Romeo grill, off of a 47 Alfa Romeo Ferrari hybrid, I guess you would call it, and started from there, and kind of said, well, if I was going to build a hot rod that was a Ferrari, what motor would I use? Well, I picked the Daytona motor from the 1970 Daytona, which was just a really hot a V12. I think it was 375 horsepower back then. This car here is a car I affectionately called the chopped rod, and basically I was watching one of those biker build-offs on Discovery one night, and I thought to myself, well, what happened if you crossed a chopper and a hot rod together? So I picked the 32 for it because it's, you know, it's kind of the icon of it all, of all hot rods. So what I did is I took and pulled a section out of the back here and shortened the car, so it's actually more of coupe proportions in length, and then I wedged it here, so it has this almost dragster feel, and hence the reason I put the dragster in the back. I put a big FE motor in it with my stacks that I designed that are on the custom car I'm building now. And once again, I used the Buell type brakes. It was the first application I did this one before I did this one. And I envisioned a full extruded aluminum frame that's fully polished and punched, and so that for lightness and just overall cool effect. And then it's got these spinner wheels that are held on with actual knockoffs. And it's got the old school style of, a drop wall where you actually have the 45-degree bank that comes down, and comes in like the old original American mags, which is what a lot of the new vintage wheels they're reproducing now don't have. And I think that's part of why they don't have that same beauty that the original Americans had, and so
You just taught me something. I didn't realize that whole angle thing. That's cool.
yeah, it really does make a difference. And part of how I picked that up was when I did my reverse wheels on my Ford. The same thing. When the wheels reverse, there's a 45-degree angle in the back for the drum for clearance, and it's what makes them look right.
That's the secret.
This car here was it was featured as a car in a dream car segment in Rod Custom, and it's a '61 Chevy with a '67 Impala roof on it. And I'm kind of coined the term roofectomy. And what I like to do is I like to swap roofs. I've been doing this since I first started with the idea of even customizing a car. I just, sometimes the roof line is so bad on a car, if you change it, man, the car just kind of starts singing. And so my car I'm building now is actually living proof. That's a '65 Chevy Impala roof on a '54 Ford. And people were like, I can't even imagine that. But when you see it, it looks like it belonged on there. This is another roofectomy. This is a '58 Chevy Impala roof on I seem to like Impala roofs. I don't something about the Chevy roof lines. I don't know. But anyway, I put this on a '55 Buick. And one of the things I did to this car, and a lot of people don't realize it until they see it, is that the Buicks, for some reason, had this little short round wheel arch back here. And I never quite understood why they did that. They had this beautiful sweep here, and then it just cut off, real notchy looking back here. So I put that back. I basically matched the arches, and that kind of gives this car kind of a flow. And then I Frenched everything in here. These are 59 Pontiac taillights there, and reworked 55 bumpers here, and reworked 55 bumper in front. And then these are Frenched in 53 front headlights.
And you kept our old friends in here, the Ventaports. That's good.
Absolutely. I thought those were important. This is a Century, not a Roadmaster. The Roadmasters actually sit up a little higher. The Centuries were actually a prettier car and a lighter car. They were actually faster. This was also done for a magazine. This was those Chevy Carrioles, or they called them Suburbans.
Right.
They had the roof on them. They were kind of the original SUVs. And this here has the idea of splitting the car in two, kind of a split image. I would use the name, except Hot Wheel already had it. But the original '59 pickups had the twin eyebrow snout, and I wanted to play off that. And as I was driving down the street one day, I saw one of these, and I went, God, would that be cool to just run the split all the way down the thing? So how would I do that? And I realized that in order to really make it look effective, you had to cut the roof off. So I cut the roof off and filled it in, and kind of created this tonneau that would drop down on the guys and him, and kind of did this up as if this was some kind of race truck. And then I did a solid rear thing. This is actually where the stock tail lights used to be, and I just kind of added that light.
Kind of an old Aurora look to it.
Yeah. And then this goes way back. This is 1998. This is the first time I was in Rod and Custom. It was a fat fendered issue, and he said pick some oddball fat fenders that people don't generally customize, and I picked this '48 Pontiac here, and try to keep it with the traditional look with the Hillebrand smoothies, and played off the ribs and ran these right through the grill, and got rid of, I had kind of a church steeple grill originally, and I took all that out and Frenched that in, and kind of left that thing, and used a girl I knew to look through the window. Another car that I did for the magazines, I don't believe this one has even been published yet. I don't even know yet. I think it's on its way. Maybe it never will be. But this is a '60 Ford, and what I did here is I took a Torino roof, a '68 Torino roof would actually fit, and I cut all this excess out of the C-pillar. The old Torino roof went like this. I cut this back to give it kind of that thing. And once again, you got matching angles. I tend to like to do that. And then I matched the fenders. It's got a little lip on the fender, which the car didn't have originally. And this is the air intake for the induction. It comes in and it splits and runs up in here. And then the exhaust is exactly the same shape coming out, so it looks like this is continually running underneath the car from front to back. This is a Fordillac. There was a guy back in the 50s who actually took Fords and put Cadillac motors in, called them Fordillacs. And if you actually go through an American manufacturer's guide, you'll actually find Fordillac listed in there. Anyway, I took off on that concept, and this was actually the car I originally wanted to build, but it was just a little bit pricey for me to do at the time, because this has got about 5 inches sectioned out of the body, and And actually, is it 7? I can't remember. I have it written down somewhere, but it's heavily sectioned, and then it's got a top chop. It's got, I think they're 89 Cadillac tail lights. This is a 56 Lincoln rear bumper off of a Lincoln Mark 1. These are 57 Cadillac, 56 Cadillac bumpers with the 56 chrome. Yeah. And then the headlights have been Frenched, and I played off using the Ford crest line and the Cadillac V. This is probably my most famous of the dream cars, because this car is coming to life. It's being built in Starlight Rod & Custom right now. And once again, this is a 65 Chevy Impala roof on a 54 Ford. I've got a full Mercury clip on here. Some things have changed on this design since we started the actual production. Like my old professor said in industrial design school, the concept's on paper, but the design actually happens in 3D, and it's so true. As you get through the 3D phase, you start seeing the way it catches light in certain ways, or that maybe this doesn't actually look right when you look at it at a certain angle, and so things start changing. And as we got working on this, we began to realize that the Ford fenders just kind of looked bulky, and the Mercury fenders were so much cleaner looking. So we switched the whole front clip, so it's actually got a Mercury clip on it now. It was one of the major changes, but the rest of the car is essentially the same car that I conceptualized here. I mean, even some of the things I called out here in my article actually came to life. Actually does have autometer gauges in it that look like T-bird. They were made to look like 57 T-bird gauges.
Well, Keith, this is gorgeous. I think we need to see the real deal here. I think we need to go take a look at what this looks like from here to real metal.
Okay, let's go.
So Keith, we're heading off to see the real deal on that 54 Ford, but this is a piece that you have a lot of pride in that's going to be part of that 54 Ford.
Right, yeah, this is the back seat. It's actually a 66 T-bird rear seat. The part that I did was this. I took this out of a 62 Pontiac, this chrome bezel here, and it had ribs. I cut those ribs out, and then this is out of a 70 Buick Riviera that I cut and scavenged that piece out, and I got this out of a 55 T-bird, and I hand cut and made this V out of aluminum. I always really thought that was just a classy look, having that grille right there between the seats.
Well, let's go look at the real thing.
Absolutely, let's go.
All right, let's go. So Keith, we saw the artwork, and now we are seeing well along the way. This is the real deal here being built.
Yeah, it transitioned. It was originally just going to be a kind of a cool, fun custom that I was going to take and drive and enjoy and use. And somewhere along the line, the thing kind of got out of hand and became this car that's going to ultimately be a trailer queen for at least the first year that I own it, because it's got commitments to be at shows and things like that with the sponsors we've picked up on it. Back here, one of the things I did, and I mentioned this before, is I like to reshape wheel arches. I liked the basic shape here of this bulge that has this little angle, so I kind of matched that here. And the guys did a phenomenal job getting that to come back. And it was very hard because it's a complex curve. I mean, we really suffered trying to get this thing to flow right, so that when you look at it from either direction, it doesn't look notchy or chopped in some way. We did the same thing in the front fenders, which are off the car right now. They're actually hanging out there and drying. We shaved it, of course. We're keeping the stock Ford trim here. They have the 54s have what we call the little dolphin fin. It's a little keel-shaped thing here, and it looks just right there. And then it's got to have the Mercury spears here. So this car's kind of a cross between a Ford and a Merc. Now the biggest change you're going to notice is this top.
Exactly, yeah.
The top is probably the most significant thing that is really setting this car apart. It's got a 65, 66 GM full-size roof. It actually came off a Wildcat. When we initially came up with the concept, we were talking about using an Impala roof. But when we went to the memory lane to get the thing, we found the best roof on a Wildcat, meaning overall best condition. The back window is actually a narrowed Camaro. That's a 67 narrowed Camaro window glass. We're using their chrome trim and everything in it. And the funny thing about this, and it was interesting, we were originally going to chop this top and make it look like this. But Edgar over here at Starlight had made the right call. He said, let's use an Impala roof. As soon as he said that, I said, well, that's not going to fit. It's too wide. Yeah, we'll take a section out of it. Oh, yeah, that'll work. What they did here, using this top, this piece of rain gutter here lined right up with the stock rain gutter. It was exactly the same size. So we're using the Ford trim chrome pieces here, and we're using the Wildcat piece here. And so when it's all done and said, this is going to look like it came that way from the factory, which is very unique.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. The tail end, you've done some...
We did some work here on the tail end. We extended the quarters 4 inches, and the reason I did that is, as I was going through the design phase, I kept looking at the Mercuries, and I kept looking at the Ford, you know, inside profile, and I go, why does a Ford look so pudgy? It began to dawn on me when I started reading the spec sheets on them. The Mercury is 4 to 8 inches longer than the Ford. So what we did is we added the length back into the quarter, and I looked at the Mercuries and I realized where they were adding the length in. And if you look at any of the Mercuries, you can see they have this kind of deep cove here between the fenders here. The other thing we did is we took and we Frenched these light housings in and gave them a little slant on them, so they kind of follow this slant theme all the way through. Back here we're going to have a Corvette exhaust trumpet off a 59 Corvette. An exhaust will actually route through this opening, and it comes up here and it stops about here, and then it comes back around and it meets up with I believe the piece was off of a 61 T-Bird. It's the push bar on the 61 T-Bird. It comes up in a new shape, so they cut that in half and they created that piece. They came up here, and then Jack finished it off with a piece of Camaro, the tip of a Camaro bumper, you know, when you 67 Camaro. So it's made of 3 pieces. And then inside here we're using a Mustang gas tank. The beauty of doing that is it allows us to put a tank up in the air and gives you more ground clearance underneath. You know, this car is going to be on airbags and is going to be able to be dropped, you know, very low to the ground, and last thing you want to do is dragging your gas tank. And the way the old gas tank was, it actually sat down a little below the body line. So talking to one of the guys in the car club, the Devils, they said they were putting Mustang tanks in there, and I said, that's a great idea. So that's what we ultimately did there. So it's got the Mustang tank in there. And then here's something that they did was very intuitive, is this hump here was created to drop this car down when it's in its lowest position. They had to have a clearance for the pumpkin. So what they did here is they took a wheelbarrow, a Sears wheelbarrow, and cut it up and made that hump, and that's how they make their hump. That's a 56 Ford dash pod instrument panel. And the old Ford one, I'll show you a picture of what the old Ford one it looked like. It had like a clear top on it, and where the light would blow through, so that it daylight. That was their thinking back in '54 when they did the car. It was a really unattractive deal. It had a sweeper with 2 little things, just kind of a, you know, kind of dorky looking. So I replaced it with the 56 pod, which has 5 round analog gauges in it, and in this there's going to be a engine turned piece of aluminum that goes across that fills that panel. And I had autometer gauges made with the brush centers and everything to look like 57 T-Bird gauges.
So we have a car in primer. What color is that car going to be?
The car is going to be Purple Rhapsody, made by DuPont's new Hot Hues line. And we're going to do a variation of a color like this, Hot Hues Sassy Orchid on the top. And that's going to be...
This is the top, and this is the body.
Right.
Keith, this is pretty. This looks neat, and it looks like it's going to work really well too. So what do you have here?
This is a very, very now dirty 390 Ford I bought from a buddy and went through. I spent about 150 hours detailing and getting this motor smoothed out. If you look at the things that are exposed, you can see all the casting marks have been taken off. I ground everything down, and anywhere there was a divot or a mark, I used the JB Weld to fill it and then sanded it smooth. And then painted the whole motor with 2 coats of an epoxy-based primer, and then shot it with an enamel over that. This is the same color the car is going to be. It's got a factory tri-power. It's off of 406. I found that in my buddy's shop. Almost tripped over it, in fact, and I was just happened to be telling a guy that I was going to put a tri-power in the car, and almost tripped over this tri-power. And I ended up buying that from him, and got it all reworked and redone. And the thing that I found is that Ford runs their carburetors backwards. The bowls are on this side. And they run in a very tight configuration, so you have a very tough time finding any kind of air cleaner that looks good outside the factory oval that was on there. And I wanted to highlight that I had multiple carburation on here. So I went and I designed a set of air stacks for this thing, and they look wonderful, and they match the fins here and everything. It's just a really nice looking air stack. Essentially, this should be about 300 horsepower, and it's backed by a top loader Ford 4-speed. I tend to believe in having a car that shifts. I see a lot of cruisers out there, then you hear them drive away and it's an automatic, and I'm always disappointed. To me, it's, in the old days, those cars, they were shift them, 3 on the tree or 4 on the floor, and so this has got a little bit of muscle car going into it yet. I didn't want it to be in a real fast car. I've got a Mustang that's already, outrageous and unstreetable, and I just didn't want to go that route with this car. I wanted this thing to be just completely drivable, getting this thing drive to Paso and have some fun with the thing.
All right, I have a request. Can sometime in the future, can I go cruising with you on this?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keith, thank you very much. It's been a real honor to have you on the show, to see a car from concept to near completion. I know it's going to be completed real soon. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
And thank you for tuning in this week. We'll have another great show for you next week, so see you then. Bye-bye.